I think that the one belief that I would shift is that cloud has to be expensive, because a lot of people think about that. We have seen like some movements to like migrate off of cloud to save costs with AI especially. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I think you do not want to use cloud as you used your previous infrastructure. You have to do it the cloud way.
Welcome back to Between Fires and Futures, the podcast for IT leaders balancing urgent fires with the bigger mission, building what's next. I'm your host, Tonya Terrell, and today's guest is someone who's not just keeping up with the future, he's helping define it. Martin Hauskrecht is the head of engineering at Labyrinth Labs, where he designs cloud infrastructure that actually scales. He's also the curator of the TLDR DevOps newsletter read by over 1.25 million tech leaders. Martin specializes in building robust, highly available systems on AWS and Azure, leveraging Kubernetes and serverless technologies. He's contributed to open source projects, but built observability frameworks with tools like Grafana and Prometheus, and written extensively on solving real-world cloud and DevOps challenges. From Kubernetes to cost controls, Martin brings clarity to one of today's messiest mandates: do more in the cloud with less. And today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most pressing pain points IT leaders face right now: cloud cost control. Because let's be honest, your AWS build didn't get the memo about the tightening budgets. So in this episode, we're digging into where IT teams actually overspend in the cloud, why Kubernetes isn't the budget breaker you might think it is, and how to reduce costs without killing innovation. So let's get into it. Martin, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes. So do you want to spend the first minute telling our audience about what you do and why you're uniquely qualified to talk about how IT leaders can rein in cloud spend?
Definitely. So we as a company mainly focus on building infrastructures. My take on this is to build basically Kubernetes and serverless infrastructures in AWS and Azure. We specialize, as you said, in Kubernetes, and that's one of the bigger cloud technologies, I think, nowadays, that we have been able to use to scale the infrastructures of our clients, but also to efficiently use it to address their billing issues or reduce the bill, because it allows us to use different approaches to understand the bill, but also to reduce it and to efficiently address some of the potential pain points and issues that we see across companies using the cloud.
Yeah. So why do you think cloud costs are so out of control for so many companies right now, even the ones with strong tech teams?
So I think the main reason is that building infrastructure in the cloud is a lot different than doing it the traditional way. Before, when you wanted to build infrastructure, you just bought a couple of machines or rented them out, and then it had a really easy to understand price tag. It costs you bought the machines, and that was very clear how much you are paying for them. The pricing model in the cloud is a lot different. There's a lot of services just in AWS. There's, I think, over 200 of them that you can use, and each of them has a slightly different pricing model. So it's very hard and very complex to understand. That's the first reason. I think the second reason is that cloud has many benefits that we can talk about today, and it allows you to start quickly when you want to build something new, which is especially useful, if you're a small company or a startup that needs to spin up something quickly. But it also means that after some time you can forget about things. After some time you can lose track of what you have built. And when you're successful as a company and you grow your business, it also means that you grow your infrastructure, and at some point it can spiral out and you might start paying too much for it. So I think it's a combination. So it's a different approach of how you design and implement the infrastructure with a very different pricing model than the original way. And also it's very complex. So it's easy to lose track of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So really, cloud complexity just comes from more services, more confusion. Do you think the speed of scaling also outpaces the discipline of managing?
Partially, I think so. When we try to design infrastructure, scaling is one of the bigger priorities that we have, because there's very little amount of companies and products that need constant usage. most of the products, softwares and solutions will have some spikes in usage during daytime and nighttime, or like public holidays, weekends, and so on. So scaling can also help you be able to sustain the changes in demand, but also to efficiently save some resources and save some money when you don't need the power, when you just don't need the scale that you would originally have to build the infrastructure for. So I think scaling is one of the key aspects that can help to save the bill. But what we also see is that a lot of companies are overpaying because they build a solution that might be too complex for the start. Then they can have idle or unused resources. It's just the solution can be too powerful or too complicated for their need. And they are just paying for wasted capacity. So what we try to do is to optimize this as much as possible, and so you can utilize the resources as efficiently as possible. What we also see is that a lot of people and companies are forgetting about resources. When you build a product, when you build some software, you change it over time. You add new features, you develop it, and that also relates to the changes in the infrastructure. So as you add a new feature, you might potentially need a new service, or as you remove some features, you can also remove some parts of the infrastructure. But usually people tend to forget about that. So after some time, after a couple of years, when we take a look at some infrastructures in the cloud, we usually can find a lot of resources that are just forgotten because the company might be lacking some visibility into the billing. And over time, that can accumulate, especially if the company is successful and especially if it grows, the scale gets larger as well. So that's also a area of invisible waste, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned visibility, observability. Do you find that most teams even know where to look?
I think most teams tend to overlook it. When we talk about observability, I think people usually think first about looking at the system level metrics like latencies or CPU usage, memory usage, etc. Something that is actually related to the performance of the application and to the stability. I think that's the first place where people look. Cost visibility is usually the second. Usually you start to take care about this only when the costs are too high already. So not a lot of people and not a lot of companies focus on this in the beginning. So I think it's a very important topic to talk about, but usually when we see companies and when we talk with companies, they tend to overlook it at the start, especially because when you're small, you're not paying too much for it. You don't really care if you're utilizing that efficiently because the cost is very, very, very little. Also with cloud vendors, they are able to offload some of the costs with credits. For example, a lot of startups are receiving credits for cloud. And that is a great thing because it allows you to start quickly and allows you to build your product to get sooner to the market. But it also can mean that when you don't put good practices in place, you can lose track of it. And then once you actually have to start paying the bill, you can lose track of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just curious, how much of this do you think is a tooling issue versus a process or culture gap?
I think most of it is a process gap or a culture gap. When we talk about cost optimization, I think it's a continuous process that companies have to undertake. So I think it's more of a philosophical approach than a tooling gap. There's a lot of tools for this. So each vendor have their own tooling for cost visibility or anomaly detection and stuff like that. So there are tools that are ready-made for you to use, but still it's a complex topic. You have to have a good knowledge about the infrastructure because cost optimization is basically about making some changes to the architecture and to the infrastructure. There are some easier ways to cost optimize, and then there are more complicated ways. But when you want to save some good amount of money, it also means that you are going to make bigger changes. So it's always a complex topic. It's not about just finding the issue, but also being able to solve that. And that requires some skill and some knowledge about the system as a whole.
Yeah, that makes sense. So can you share some specific tools or architectural patterns that you're seeing that enable better cost control?
I think the biggest and the best approach companies can use is to have their engineering teams be aware of how much they're spending in the cloud or in AWS, as in our case. Because what we have seen is if you give people cost accountability, like they can actually see how much their changes are either saving or costing on the bill, they tend to like care about that. Yeah. Most of the times they're just not aware, and it's not their fault that they are not aware. They just don't have the tools, and they just don't really know about the approach even. So what we have seen is that it's very good to have some indicators about how a particular application is costing in the cloud, or how a particular feature, for example, will cost in the infrastructure cost. So I think that's one of the best approach. It's not easy to implement, to be honest. It takes some time. So when somebody wants to start, I think the best thing and they don't like have an idea about what they're paying for, I think the best approach is to just look at the bill as a whole and see like the biggest cost factors, what they're paying for. So if it's compute, if it's storage, often it's networking, for example, and that has a lot of hidden costs included in that. And then you can start looking for some ways to improve that. So there's like some low-hanging fruits usually, which you can implement immediately with little change, but then it tends to get more complicated. What we have seen is that when we come across a company that didn't optimize their bill before, we see that usually we can cut down about 10 to 20% very easily.
Wow.
Most of the time.
Yeah, that's significant.
That can be significant, especially if you're like a larger startup or scale up. That can mean a couple of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars even. Yeah. So usually you can save about that, but it can be even more. Like we have seen cases when we were able to save 50% or even more of the costs. And that usually involves some bigger changes, but usually, like sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. So it's about choosing the right approach, the right tooling, and also I think aligning with the needs of the company, because that is the most important thing. Like you want to align with their business goals as well, because this is not just about the infrastructure as a system. The infrastructure is there to support the business. Like it's the foundation to support it and allow it to grow. I think this is the most important aspect or a way how you can look at it, is that infrastructure is just a tool. Like managers and like CTOs do not care about how they run the infrastructure. They want to be able to like support the business and support the engineering teams.
Yeah. I mean, our team's on the front lines every day, right? Talking to IT leaders one-on-one, and they hear a lot that IT leaders are surprised or even shocked by their cloud bills. And these are IT leaders who believe that they're really optimized. They think that they've optimized, but they still get surprised by their bills. So especially the ones that think that they're optimized, what are they actually missing? What's a red flag in a bill that most teams miss entirely?
So usually when we talk with companies and they say they optimize their bill, it means that they have, for example, purchased some reservations in AWS or some saving plans. And that essentially means that you are able to commit to a certain spending in the cloud, and the vendor is able to give you a discount because you are paying something upfront or you're committing to a certain period of time. And that's a very easy way to optimize if you know that you are going to stay there and you're going to use the services. And most of the cases when people talk that they have optimized, it's something like this. When we take a look after that, the first thing that I would look at is, for example, if they are utilizing their reservations well. Like they have purchased some capacity, but are they utilizing it well? Maybe they can like do it differently. Maybe they can change the types of instances that they are using for their databases or compute, and they can save some amount on that. Usually, like in 90% of cases, we can find a lot of forgotten resources, especially like database snapshots, for example, that haven't been used for a couple of years or something. And that's not really visible at the first sight, but that it can like cost you $1,000 for easily.
Yeah.
Then there can also be like architectural patterns that they are not realizing that they could improve, because once you have built a system in your company and you're happy with it, you don't really challenge the architecture that much as we get new tools and as we get new approaches. So usually we can also find ways to tweak what they have in some way that it is not too aggressive or like too big of a change for them, but it can also mean some savings for them. So for example, for us, as we specialize in Kubernetes nowadays, a very good change was to introduce a different way of scaling in AWS. There was a tool called Karpenter that was introduced a couple of years ago. And as we started adapting it across our customers, we have seen that even if they have optimized their bill and they are using like spot instances in AWS, which are very cheap compared to the normal ones, to the on-demand ones, we were still able to cut down the costs like 20% more or something like that, because we were able to pack their applications more tightly onto the machines that they had, and just to like optimize the way they have used the capacity that they were paying for. Mm-hmm. And if you want to go even deeper, but that also involves more changes into the way you run applications, and that might make sense for somebody, but might not have for somebody else. And that's, for example, looking at the application level, because it's not just about the infrastructure itself. It's the way how your applications actually like utilize the infrastructure, how they work with databases, how they make DNS queries, for example, or like how they essentially do what they do. And with that, we have been able to see the most significant savings. So for example, we had a couple of customers that were running applications with PHP. And like looking at the deeply technical level, if you can make some changes for example, changing the engine that you are using to run the PHP application, we were able to see some like 60% savings on the infrastructure because it was more performant, it was more efficient, it was just like a new approach, a new technology. So I think those are the best changes that you can make. I think it's like a tiered approach. Basically, you always start with the easiest ones that are not affecting the architecture, because you can make some savings there and it will not like cost any development time. It will not make any significant changes. But then you can also go deeper, and like if it makes sense, you can always look for something more. I don't think it's good to spend months on this. I think it's like good to choose a point where you just don't want to optimize this anymore. Yeah. I think it's good to like continuously go back to this, but you don't want to over optimize, because you will be paying more for the time that you're actually trying to do that. Than
what do you think is the easiest quick win that you typically suggest to a new client?
So if they don't have any commitments in the cloud, I would look at that. That's the like simplest thing that you can do. If they are using Kubernetes, for example, it's very good to use spot instances, which is basically some capacity that the AWS has unused with a significant discount. It has some technical downsides, but with Kubernetes, you are able to minimize most of them. So that's a very easy change that they can take, and they can save 50 to 70% on the cost for the instances that they're using for the compute. And then I would say look at the most or the bigger bills on the bigger items on your bill. So go from top to bottom and just look at what you're paying for. So if it's data transfer, try to look why the bill is so high, and try to identify what's causing it, basically. And that's also like when we talk about observability, that's the approach that it takes. Like it essentially tries to identify a cause of some problem or some symptom. So we usually try to do this as well. We have a lot of tools that can help us with this, but what we do for companies is that we look at what they're paying for. We want to identify why they are paying for it, because it can be legitimate or it might not be. And we try to optimize according to their business goals as well, because you also have to take into account how they are expecting to grow the company in the future. That affects how big of a commitment they can make. And like, you always have to think about the business as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Martin, how do you guys approach cost optimization differently than maybe other or most DevOps consultants or tools? Like, what's your philosophy?
So I think the main difference is that we are able to look at the deep technical level as well. So the case I've mentioned with the PHP optimization, for example, that's not something most of the companies will do because it involves like a lot of work that is deeply technical. Most of the companies will just like help you to find the reservation, the saving plans, and the easy stuff. We always try to challenge the client as well. Like we always ask them the hard questions, like why have you designed this way? Because we want to understand and we want to be able to help them to potentially optimize this. So we try to look at things differently. We want to understand like why they are doing things the way they do it, especially at the application level. And we like try to always involve some solutions that are a good fit for them. So sometimes that means that you will not be using a managed service from AWS or from some other cloud vendor because we have an open source alternative that is a better fit for you and that can also save you some money. So we don't want to be too strict with using a single solution from a single vendor. We always want to be able to find the best solution for the client. That means that we have like a couple of different ways of doing that for an individual solution. So for example, for a database, if you want to run Postgres or Elasticsearch or something like that, we have different ways of doing it for different clients because what's a fit for one might not be for another. So we always want to look for the best solution and look also for their needs and business because that changes the way you run infrastructure entirely.
Yeah. It would be great if you could share a before and after story. So, can you share a story where a client came to you with ballooning costs and you helped them with that? Like what was the situation before and what changed?
So, for example, we had a client that had some issues with cost for data transfer because I think that's the most mysterious thing that you have in cloud, how much you're paying for transferring the data, because there's a lot of different charges for like regional transfer, inter-regional. There's a different like availability zones in each region, and you are paying different costs for everything. So it's very hard to understand, and it's a very low level problem. It's hard to identify like how much you're actually, or like how can you attribute the cost for data transfer to an application. It's relatively easy to do with, for example, a virtual machine. Like you can say that this application runs on this machine and that machine costs certain amount of money. But like dividing the cost of data transfer is very hard to do. And so we had a client who was paying a lot of money for transferring data in AWS, and we had to figure out why and optimize that. And there were a couple of approaches that we undertook. First of them was that there's a thing called NAT gateway in AWS, which essentially means that you are able to like connect to the internet from a private instance. And AWS has like a special charge for that. You're paying for data transfer, but you're also paying for data going through the service. So we looked for alternatives and we found an open source solution that was able to replace it with a fraction of the costs. And like we were able to save a couple of thousands of dollars for that. And now we offer it to a lot of our clients that are transferring a lot of data because we have found out that it's a good solution and it can easily replace the service that we were using before. Then we also like found out a lot of like application level differences in what they were like trying to do and what they were actually doing. So we found out that they were doing a lot of inefficient database queries, for example, and we were able to optimize that. And they have been doing it for years. Nobody really like tried to address that because they didn't even know that was a problem because it was like that for 5 or 10 years. So no, but it wasn't an anomaly. But often you found things like this, like hidden things that are not visible on the infrastructure level, but they are being produced by the application. Mm-hmm. And when you start digging, these things will come out and you can do small changes and it can have a very significant like approach. We had one case where we like optimized some database queries and the usage of the database or like the cost of the database came down from 20K a month to 5. Wow. So
that's massive.
Sometimes you really find like massive savings that are hidden.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned Kubernetes, and it's really become synonymous with modern cloud architecture. But it's not always cheap or simple, right? So where do you see it helping or hurting when it comes to managing cost and complexity?
Mm-hmm. So I think Kubernetes is a great tool for cloud, especially because it allows you to scale very efficiently and utilize a lot of solutions that can help you in any way possible. I think nowadays the ecosystem around Kubernetes is huge, and I think that's a good thing when you are a company that actually needs the scale and actually needs the solutions to sustain the business. But at the start, it might be too complex, and you might end up paying for infrastructure that costs a couple of thousand for hosting one application just because it's designed to handle a load that will never be there. So I think Kubernetes is a great tool, and it solves a lot of issues with scaling, with availability, with the ability to deploy efficiently for developers. It builds a lot of abstractions that allow people to use infrastructure without actually having to know how to do that. But it can also lead to bigger costs if you are too small, if your application or your product is too small at the start, and also can be too complex to manage for people who are not familiar with it. Yeah. And that also involves costs, because costs are not just cost for infrastructure, but you also pay some people to manage it. You also can costs can relate to how soon you get your product to the market, for example, that also are hidden costs that you might not be accounting for. Or if you have an outage, for example, that also costs you some money in lost revenue, but people do not account for it. So there are various approaches for that. And I think it's about choosing the right tool for the job for your case. So it's always good to understand the need and the scale you're building your solution for. If it's too small, you probably don't need Kubernetes. It will be too complex for you. It will cost too much money. If you expect growth, and if you are a company that, for example, has some issues with stability, with scaling, with expanding into new regions or something like that, Kubernetes might be a great tool for you. Mm-hmm.
So when's the right time for an IT leader to consider Kubernetes?
I think when they are either struggling with scale. So, for example, they have been seeing higher usage of their product, and their infrastructure is not really able to scale anymore, dynamically. Or if their pattern of using the application is very inconsistent. So, for example, usually you have bigger usage during the day than during the night in most cases. And Kubernetes is a great tool that you can use to actually scale the infrastructure to accommodate for these changes in usage, which you would not be able to do in the traditional way when you buy servers and you have them somewhere in a data center. Potentially, if they are also blocking some of their engineering teams, they are not able to deploy easily enough or quickly enough, Kubernetes can be a great tool for enhancing engineering experience or productivity, for example. So it has ways of deploying the applications in a more, I think, let's say ergonomic way. You can do it more easily as a developer to deploy on Kubernetes than to deploy on a traditional server, I believe. So there are various points or various points in time that you might consider it. Mm-hmm. But when you're a company with two developers and a very, very an MVP level product, it might not be the right tool for the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. If you could shift one belief about cloud infrastructure that you're seeing keeps companies or IT leaders stuck in waste, what would that be? Because I've heard you say cloud optimization, cost optimization is a mindset. So if there's one belief you could shift, what would that be?
So I think that the one belief that I would shift is that cloud has to be expensive, because a lot of people think about that. Mm-hmm. We have seen some movements to migrate off of cloud to save costs. Mm-hmm. I think that
more and more so with AI now too.
Yeah, with AI especially, yes. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I think you do not want to use cloud as you use your previous infrastructure. It's you have to do it the cloud way. So you have to utilize the ways or like the features that cloud allows you to, and like, for example, the scaling, the spot instances, the options to purchase saving plans, and the ability to use new services quickly. Essentially, that can mean that you're paying less for the infrastructure because it's more stable. You don't have outages that like causes loss in revenue for you. You can scale virtually to infinity if you need to. You can scale down if you don't need the power. So as I think a lot of people are looking at cloud costs as something that has to be high. I don't think that's true. I think if you do it properly and if you optimize, if you like use the services as they are intended to use, cloud can very much accelerate your business and build a great foundation for your product, and also allow you to grow, because that's like goal of most companies is to grow their business and like bring a great product for their customers. And I think if you utilize cloud correctly, it can be a great tool for you to be able to achieve this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this has been great. Love for you to leave our audience with just what is one simple thing an IT leader could do right now, this week, to start uncovering invisible costs in their environment.
So I think what I would start with is to just take a look at your last invoice for your infrastructure. Just take a look like how much you're paying for and ask yourself if you know what you're paying for. If you don't, just go item by item and you can like try to start figuring out what you're actually paying for and why you are paying for it. And usually you can find things that you can optimize, and usually you find things that you are not aware that you are using. So that's how we usually start, and I think that's the best approach that they can take. If they want to go more deeper, I think the best approach in general is to make your engineering teams accountable for the costs in ways that they know how much their service is costing in AWS or like in cloud, because that tends to like give them some inspiration to optimize. They on their own might want to optimize the cost, or you can give them some rewards. We have seen also that like you can reward your engineering teams if they can bring the cost down. And I think it's a very good experience for them as well, because they'll be happy that they were able to optimize and help with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this has been so helpful, Martin. Thank you. Thank you so much for just bringing this clarity and the actual playbook on smarter cloud spending. So if you're listening and you've ever opened your AWS bill and felt your soul leave your body, this is your sign to optimize without compromise. You can sign up for Martin's TLDR DevOps newsletter at tldr.tech for bite-sized insights that actually keep up with you. And check out Labyrinth Labs' cloud optimization offering by heading over to technologymatch.com to connect with their team and see how they're helping companies go lean without losing power. Just enter in the search. You can enter in the search Labyrinth Labs or cloud cost optimization, and they should come up in the results. And Martin, how else can people connect with you?
I think they can either go to lablabs.io and like click on contact there, or they can connect on LinkedIn with me. I'm happy to talk with anybody who wants to discuss their cloud bills. Great.
Thank you. Until next time, keep putting out fires and keep building the future. Thanks for listening.